Welcome everyone to our 2023 predictions reveal. This is 2022, but we will be talking today about Mark Anderson's top 10 predictions for 2023. Mark and I recorded a podcast about one of those predictions earlier this week, and let me tell you, there's some good ones in there. So I'm delighted to introduce Mark to you all. He probably needs no introduction to anyone in this room at this point, but Mark is the CEO of Strategic News Service. He is the chair of the Future in Review Conference, and he is the CEO of Pattern Computer, which was started on stage at FIRE about 5-6 years ago? Seven, and is now worth more than $1 billion. So he's basically just sitting around twiddling his thumbs. And he is also the author of The Pattern Future, which is all about how he learned to see patterns in the world at large and how to make predictions yourselves and recognize those patterns. So Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Brett.
It's great to be here. So you and I talked earlier this week about kind of how you go about making predictions in general and the landscapes that you review ahead of time. And I'm wondering if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about what that process was like for you this year. What were the things that you considered?
Sure. So people in our SNS membership who are have seen these in the past understand what you're referring to. What I always have tried to do until now is to, by describing the technology landscape of the world and the economic landscape of the world, help people to see what I'm seeing as a foundational way of understanding where the predictions are coming from. And in this year, it was different. And I remember you laughing like it's different, right? But it was different. And it is different every year, but it was different. And the difference was, and I want to hark back to what many members will remember quite well, I think, which is our SNS mantra. And I think we've done some pretty foundational work in economics, better than any of the schools I know, for sure. Including the idea that countries have their own business model, forget isms, and including the idea of this SNS mantra, which is, quote, in the post-information age, technology drives every sector of the global economy and intellectual property is its asset class. So that's so true today. When we first said that, there were a lot of people who thought IP was only patents and copyrights, didn't understand what we're talking about in trade, and had no idea what China was up to. Well, now that's all done, So thanks to Invent IP and Evan's work and other work, people working on these questions, it's pretty clear what's going on in the world economy. And this is now clearly true. And it's so true that this year it became obvious to me that I could no longer have separate categories of landscapes for technology and the economy because they just are the same. And one example that we talked about earlier today, I think, was Taiwan. I mean, how can you possibly talk about Taiwan without the idea of it being invaded by China? How do you talk about it without the idea of it producing 90% of the most important chips in the world? How do you talk about it? I mean, you just can't pull apart the economic effects of an invasion or of what they do without an invasion. So these things are welded and melded and merged into one thing. So that's how I have put it together in this week's global report.
And it goes both ways, right? You can't talk about China's tech strategy without talking about its political strategy.
Exactly. They are completely wedded. And it took people a long time to appreciate how wedded they really are. Theft is integrated into the exact business model of the nation. You can't separate theft of IP worldwide from what is the nation up to this week? Or what will they do next? Yep. That's all true. So what I thought I'd do is jump through a few of these things. And for our audience to understand the format we're going to use today, I'm going to be reading this stuff and then we're going to be talking about it. The landscapes will not take very long, but the other parts will. So what we'll do is I'll do the landscapes and then we'll jump down, and maybe if everybody turns off their microphone, that'd be a good idea at the moment. And then we'll be sure.
And I would add one thing, which is we will be leaving about 20 to 30 minutes at the end for questions from all of our members. So
that's right.
Do not worry if you have questions, just hold them. You can put them in the chat if you want, but we will be getting to them at the end.
So we'll quickly go through the landscapes, and then we will get to the top 10. And then what will happen, I think, is that Barrett and I will have a short discussion of each one, and then we'll open it up to the group. All right, so number one, chips, of course, chips. To the West and to the inventing nations in general, chips drive almost every economic product and are considered ABC, or anywhere but China. This schism literally breaks the world economy in two, as China and its allies are forced into second or third generation tech overall, while the West continues to rush forward in chip engineering and production at increasing innovation speeds. No new chips, no dice in this tech-driven economy. Number two, AI. Recent reports that Microsoft Research has provided a large majority of the funding, knowledge, and headcount in China's total AI efforts since they began underline two important aspects of AI. One, the West created and remains ahead in this top target of the Chinese Communist Party Standing Committee and will remain so. And two, US companies need to stop aiding and abetting the enemy in this field. Microsoft, Apple, Tesla, IBM, and Intel all need to reassess their roles in building Chinese industrial military AI. The big dark secret of neural networks will continue to constrain the growth in this sector. The black box, the wall of diminishing returns, and the requirement for hypotheses all continue to emerge as complete fails in the neural network world of AI, which means virtually for everyone. While new incremental predictions continue, major new discoveries remain elusive. Energy. As well-intended activists continue to rail against any fossil fuels, the truth sinks in worldwide. Getting to complete renewability will happen in two phases. One, increasing natural gas production to replace coal worldwide, particularly in China and India, for about 20 to 25 years. While two, converting all sources, including these, as quickly as possible to renewables. The efforts of OPEC Plus continue to bring Saudi into Crink's fold. When I say Crink, I mean China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. How will the Saudis accommodate their war against Iran? That's the mystery of the year. China continues to attempt to block Western efforts in green projects through global dumping of solar and windmill products. The West has figured this out and will respond in order to promote domestic manufacturing in these fields. For healthcare. Healthcare lives in two worlds today: what costs too little and does too little versus what costs way too much and does too little. We slowly begin to move toward a world in which healthcare costs less and does more, thanks almost entirely to compute's new role. This will be seen as moving from being driven by insurance and drug company mandates into evidence and data-driven models. This is just the beginning of a long process. Multi-disease diagnostics will move past the PR trauma of the Theranos fraud and full speed into real solutions that increase accuracy and decrease costs. And B, the world moves toward the goal of self-awareness of health states, as opposed to the past idea of sick versus well. This is accompanied by a fast-growing list of both devices and tests that can be worn or administered at home. And number 5, and last, discoveries. We are very interested in discoveries. Discoveries lead to innovation, and economic growth fall into two clean categories. One, the yesterday stuff providing important but incremental discoveries, and two, the new stuff providing major breakthroughs in science, tech, and business. The world of innovation moves past social networks funded by clueless VCs and back into deep science, as in the 80s. In the world of venture capital, it's back to the future time. Most VCs are completely unprepared for technical issues and or deep science, which leads to a surfeit of hesitation and dry powder. And then quickly we go through countries as well. So here in an order that I've chosen for various obvious reasons are countries of interest. Number 1, Russia. Putin loses not only Ukraine and more land in the east, but also his influence and or control of the next layer of edge ex-Soviet countries. Kazakhstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Georgia, and even Kaliningrad are now in play as they turn west, as well as Germany and Eastern EU countries such as Hungary, Romania, and others, which will pull further away politically and economically from Russia as a result of Putin's war. It is not at all clear that Putin himself can survive these events or the year. Number two, Germany. While the three car companies and many of the mid-sized firms continue Angela Merkel's pro-Chinese folly, the people of Germany react against this path, creating a political split led by the Greens on the left and joined by many nationalists on the right. Political winds shift violently against trading with the enemy, and Scholz, the chancellor, is caught in the middle, relegated to figurehead status. German companies will lose share in China, part of the Chinese long-term plan, accelerating this problem. Number three, China. As first noted in the global report in January 2015, China's domestic economy continues an accelerating implosion, made much clearer as the West strips away its various forms of collusion and support, with massive reductions in direct foreign investment, market support, and IP theft. GDP continues to drop. Fraud in the real estate sector continues to unfold. The banking sector is increasingly precarious. Bankruptcies of companies keep growing, and Xi's repression of everyone maintains its breathtaking pace. Other effects of disengagement by the West and of internal protests and demographics are all negative. The real heroes in China are leaving China, while all the past heroes have been jailed or killed. The Belt and Road Initiative, while dialed back, is now fully understood as a military economic war preparation. Major areas of operations are the South Pacific Indian Ocean, islands and ports, Central and South America, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and breaking the EU through control of Greece and Italy. Number four, CRINC, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. By the way, we made up that term, and that's now like a very, very important term in the world. We have moved into the world of the daily tightening of this alliance in energy sales, political alliance, military cooperation, and economic ties. CRINC versus the West is now the primary geopolitical story of the decade. Number five, Turkey. Turkey continues to play a pivotal, vital role and an equally impossible one. This is what happens when an increasingly Islamic government country tries to join the EU. It is an impossibility given the world's other geopolitics. Number six, Japan. Japan continues growing into its role as a co-leader in the Pacific Western Alliance. While making nice trading noises to China as its largest trading partner, Japan builds its economy and military in preparation for a fight with China. And number seven, Australia, or Oz as I call it. Oz finally believes in climate change after decades of denial, force-fed by its mining companies. It has succumbed to the inevitable logic of too much wildfire, too much rain and flooding, and too much crisis on a daily basis. Australia is now also fully awake regarding the threat posed by China, providing strong leadership versus Xi in the Pacific and at home. So that's the landscape in countries and in tech/econ.
And I will note that, although those are not your official 10 predictions for the year,
Right.
If you read through that list, you will find that there are indeed many predictions.
There are. It took me years to figure that out. People would say, you predicted so-and-so. I say, no, I didn't. And I go back and I realized they're talking about the landscape. So I did. They were right. So here we go. And now, Barrett, I think you and I will have a chat after each one of these.
Yep.
Again, I always have to say this to folks. I read these as I just did now, because I'll have to live with these a year from now. So number one, Meta is micro, a real mega fup. Introducing the term mega fup, or mega failure to understand potential. The metaverse, just like IBM's Watson, is a firing offense if your CEO is fireable. Fortunately, after about 25 quarters of diminishing revenues, Ginny Rometty was fired. Unfortunately for Facebook, after billions of dollars down the rabbit hole, Zuck is not. Perhaps they will promote him out. So Barrett, what do you think?
Well, so as you know, this was the prediction that we talked about in our podcast this week. So we've discussed this a little bit already together, but
Different crowd.
yeah, I think, my sense is that, yeah, that's definitely probably going to happen this year. The whole everything that Elon is doing at Twitter, the whole Twitter files that were just released, there is a really interesting dynamic taking place in the world of social media, which is opening people's eyes to things that the platforms have done in the past.
Yes.
Twitter is not alone in having done those things.
No.
But there has been a large deficit in accountability by all social platforms over the years.
Yeah. There was kind of a turn, wasn't there? There was a turn where everything was pretty cool in the beginning for all those guys. And then it's like, wait a minute, things got nasty and kind of evil. They hired people to increase engagement through anger to sell more ads, and the result was horrible. And then Russia got involved. All right, that was number one. Number two, this is my favorite, I think, because it's the least expected. No one on this call is going to expect number two. Sports betting catches fire. Forget Vegas. As TV, NFL, and Major League Baseball viewers know, it's time to bet on the pitch, the speed, the catch, the throw to home, the score, perhaps even the effect of the wind on a foul ball, or just bet on the bets. The sudden confluence of femtocell broadband and 5G, AI, think AWS ads, and years of lobbying state and federal governments has led us to this. Fasten your seatbelt and make sure your wallet is in your back pocket before you do. At 50 billion plus for the next 6 months, the US alone could easily see $100 billion or more spent on sports betting in 2023.
So I remember when you and I had a meeting with Paul Jacobs.
Yes.
In San Diego 2 years ago, I think it was. Actually, it must have been much more than 2 years ago. It's probably about 5 years ago at this point, because it was before our last in-person fire conference.
Yes.
And he was telling us about his company, which has been working on this.
XCOM.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now it is finally poised for release into the world.
That's a good
real-time betting.
That's right. When we had Paul, I did an interview with him at Fire on stage, and he suddenly came out with this. It's like, well, sports betting. And he was talking about the bandwidth, having a huge bandwidth inside the stadium. And I turned to him and said something like, that's going to be huge. And he goes, yeah. And I thought, this is a big secret. He understands it, but no one else kind of really sees this coming, and it's going to be gigantic. And you're right. This is the year, I think. So 2023. I don't think people have a clue how big that's going to be. All right, the next one, number three. This one's a bit mystical, a little hard to understand. E-currencies versus e-payments. Conflation leads to global risk. While it is easy to confuse these platforms, China uses the second to further the first, while the rest of the world is on autopilot as Beijing takes over the payment systems of emerging nations, using them to force adoption of the digital renminbi, the eRMB. Western governments will be too slow in understanding and reacting to this threat to the dollar, the SWIFT system, and privacy. China will succeed in using confusion to make major international inroads against the current global currency system of regulations and controls. What do you think?
So this is an interesting one because in some ways it directly not opposes, but conflicts with your earlier landscape, which is the U.S. grows more aware of everything that China is doing, except here's the blind spot.
Yes.
Right.
So, right.
And I think you're right that we are politically much more savvy, but we're still the same things that have tripped us up in the past will continue to trip us up, which is lawmakers in general don't understand technology.
No tech.
Most economists in the world at the moment don't really understand the impact of digital technology and specifically currency technology on the economy and money markets. And I think that what you're describing is China does actually, and they're very, very savvy about how to manipulate markets, how to kind of like keep the renminbi afloat at a time when they don't, out of nothing, right? It's like a mirage.
Right. And one of the things SNS I think brings to our members is we look at lots of things, not just one thing. We don't live in silos, we live across silos. And if you look at Africa, Africa has the leading e-payment system in the world, probably. And China's all over Africa. So it wouldn't be hard for China to figure this out. And all they have to do is say, let's use ours instead of yours.
What impact do you think that will have on geopolitics in Africa and
Huge.
Brazil, especially, right?
Huge.
Because
Well, that's
South America is the other place.
I think it's huge. And here we have our president offering to give some aid to them yesterday and having a big meeting and totally missing the point here. China's going to show up with an e-payment system worldwide. All these guys are going to use it, and they're all going to use ERMBs to do it. And we'll be sitting there saying, don't you want a free bag of rice? Like, well, actually, no. So anyway, I believe we're going to miss that one. Number 4, crypto craps out. My friend Mark Andreessen and the Valley VCs take a massive hit. Already done. But really, exactly who did not see this coming? Note to the California pump and dump crowd, you cannot have a currency without an army to back it. Comments?
Well, this one I feel is already happening, actually.
It is happening.
I mean, the SEC, I think it was yesterday or the day before, arrested a whole army of, not an army, a small group of social media influencers who had used social media to artificially inflate currencies.
That was stocks, penny stocks.
Oh, right, yeah, right.
They were doing a true pumping though.
Right. But it was interesting because, I watched that happen many times over the years where brands were manipulated by information warfare in order to affect stock prices. It's been going on for years. And so it took them that long to be able to put together a case.
Yeah.
I'm glad they did it.
Yeah. Different charge, different problem.
Yeah.
But the idea of pump and dump is the same. So yeah, the VCs really pumped the hell out of this, and look what it got them. I mean, literally, you can't have a currency without an army. All right, number 5, economic migration swamps political migration. The left doesn't like to talk about it, but people just want to move to a better life by the billions. This is a major challenge for the developed and the developing worlds. No economically developed nation will avoid the pain and confusion of migration's pressures far beyond their expectations or their ability to cope. Thoughts?
Where do you see that happening most?
There was an interesting story this morning in the New York Times about Cuba disappearing from the face of the earth. There's so many people, 250,000 people moved from Cuba to America in the last year.
Right.
Huge. The island is shrinking. The population is shrinking. So why? It's not because they're afraid of Castro. He's dead. It's because they could make a better living in Miami. That's it. So who blames them? But if there are no walls or rules or costs or procedures or whatever you want to say, people will just flood over into some other country. They'll go to Germany or Sweden or here. And it's not because they're looking for asylum. They're not. They're just looking for a better life with their family. And I just keep saying it. Who can blame them? Of course they want that. But I would blame any country which isn't prepared for this, because it's coming.
I think there's an interesting conflation as well between climate migration and economic migration.
They're linked.
Because
I'm trying to split between these, actually. I think you'd separate these and say, when Bangladesh floods, that's climate migration.
Right.
But, or
in Lebanon, where the banking system has been broken for 10 years.
Yeah, well, yeah. But in which developing nation, if you have a young family, wouldn't you rather live in Sweden or America? And most people would say, I would. They like their country, they like, the music and the culture. But look, have kids, where do you want them to grow up? And people have the internet. They know what it's like in New York City compared to downtown Bogota. It's like, forget it. So I don't think there are any secrets anymore about the difference in lifestyle and advantage in living in a developed country compared to an emerging nation.
Interestingly enough, I was told recently that, and I'm not sure that this is true, so take it with a grain of salt. The reason that Chinese protests erupted at the time that they did was not necessarily because of COVID-related things. It was because of the World Cup being televised in China. And the people of China finally seeing how the rest of the world is living because it got through the World Cup, got through the Great
Really?
Firewall.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that one. All right, number 6. Inflation continues to decline. Central banks created hyperinflation by a quantitative easing and 0% interest rates, and then saved us by abruptly halting QE and raising interest rates. This year, things are moving back to normal. Long live the Fed, but save us from it too. To Fed Chief Jerome Powell, hey, after you've killed the lion, you can stop pulling the trigger. And let's not forget that the economic costs of COVID, including long COVID, when global productivity drops, inflation immediately follows. Thoughts?
I mean, I'm curious to hear what's the timeline, do you think, for that?
For
when you say inflation continues
inflation.
Yeah.
Well, it's going down now.
Mhm.
Seems to be going down worldwide, probably in most countries. I think what most economists are not trained to do, and what we are trained to do, is to not look at every single possible thing from the cost of living index, but to look at the big things. So ask yourself, what will the effect of China? And you and I talked about that in a prior podcast. So China is both a deflationary effect and an inflationary effect. So which one is going to be currently in favor? And then also look at energy prices. Just one thing: what's the cost of oil? So we've been pretty good at predicting the price of oil, and my feeling right now is it's going to stay down. It's got as high as 100 plus in recent times. We made the call right away last time when it dropped from 93 down to 45 or whatever it was. So my feeling is it's in the 50s now. It's going to stay low, and so that's good, and that will have much more effect on food prices and energy, which are the top 2 contributors,
Right.
and then all the things behind energy, which is everything you eat, make, or service. So I believe that single thing will have a quicker effect than people think. And I don't think Jerome Powell has a clue about that.
And potentially the interspersal of that, and the other thing that we've talked about in another podcast is what happens if Putin disappears overnight.
Yes,
Which
that
could
would
also
be,
have which could also have a large effect on.
with all respect, right? With all respect, that would be a wonderful moment for the world economy. And I think it would be for the Russian people too. I can easily imagine a new contract with a somewhat humbled new leader saying, we want to be back in Europe and we want to sell back to Germany. Everybody goes, okay, here's the deal. They signed the deal. And, as we said, at 9 o'clock the next day, everything has changed already. Inflation has gone down. So, yeah, that's quite likely. Number 7, the AI emperor is confirmed to be half clothed. While an explosion in neural networks provides incremental improvements, the big discoveries remain elusive, and this ugly secret gets out of the bag. The gulf between what the data team promised the management team continues to grow, leaving a sour taste in corporate boardrooms. It's time to move beyond neural networks, and this is the year we will.
So, Mark, I think you have a very unique perspective into this because you are actually already moving beyond neural networks through Pattern.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm running a computer. Yeah, that's true. I do have. I mean, I get to see a lot of people. Just came from 2 days in San Francisco at the Fortune Brainstorm AI meeting. So you can kind of see what everybody's thinking in the Valley. I believe this is exactly where things are.
Are there any technologies that you're particularly excited about other than your own?
No, just mine. Well, it was funny. This sounds self-serving, but if you know that everybody, when they say AI means neural networks, it becomes a very boring world very quickly. That's not fair to AI, but it is true. Everybody, when they say, oh, I'm doing AI, they're doing neural networks. And neural networks aren't that great. So when I say, not exciting, I really mean not exciting. There are extreme limits on what those things can do. They're very good at predicting, and I'm done now. So if you want to get beyond a high prediction rate and actually learn how and why things are happening, you cannot do it with neural networks. Well, we can, but nobody else can. So it's not going to happen tomorrow unless we suddenly sell it worldwide tomorrow morning. So this is a huge problem, and it's a technical problem. It's a mathematical limit, which nobody's quite talking about. We talked about it down in San Francisco. Everybody goes like, "Oh yeah, that's a good point." So they know it's true, but they don't want to talk about it. I don't. All right, number 8, work on climate change accelerates tremendously and on Russia's battle schedule. Thank you, Vlad, for accelerating the world's move to renewables by at least a decade. Do you agree, Vlad?
Yay! We can one thing on which we can applaud.
Yep. Thank you, Vlad.
Vladimir
Well
Putin.
done. Number 9, disengagement from China is no longer optional, and an increasing flood of companies and governments will be on this path. While China fights to hide itself as a country of origin for its exports, the West will be busy decoupling and distinguishing goods made elsewhere for import. Foreign direct investment will drop, and damage from Chinese economic attacks will begin to decrease for the first time in 4 decades. This leads to improved economic security for the West and to stronger markets. Thoughts?
Well, I will just say 2 things that are, number 1, if you are interested in this topic further, we will in the new year be releasing a book called, drumroll, Disengagement, written by Evan Anderson, which is all about the steps that should be taken to disengage from China and how to protect the United States on many fronts, economically, from an IP front, from a technology and innovation perspective. And then the second thing I will say, which is a little bit self-serving for SNS, but is also self-serving for you all, is we also have just announced a new partnership with a company that you may have, whose CTO you have probably may have met before at Future in Review, which is called Secure Chat. So we are giving all SNS members now SNS free encrypted email communications. This is different than other encryption services in that you can use it in your Google and Outlook accounts. Once you get it set up, all you have to do is add it to an email. It will allow you to track who is reading your emails, when, where, whether they're being opened by any other IP addresses and what you expected. You can geofence their opening. You can set them to self-destruct. It's a really cool feature. And the other thing that came up in that conversation last week was many of you may think, well, I'm not directly working with Crown Jewel IP, and therefore I am not subject to incursion or surveillance. You would be wrong. One of the things that Junaid talked to us about is that in his intelligence work, they are mostly seeing China going after everyday business processes, including customer communications and interactions, specifically because they then take that customer list, undercut it on price, and then steal the customers. So we would recommend that you do use encryption in your email, and we're going to give it to you for free for the next year at least. So please take advantage of that. You have an email in your inboxes about it.
A heck of a deal. All right, number 10 out of 11. I have 11. Number 10, autonomy hits the certification wall. As it was before AI came on stage, certification for safety is a major choke point, now clearly in the pathway to self-driving cars, autonomous flight, and any other proposed autonomous robots related to human survival. In the US, neither the FAA nor the NHTSA nor any other agency today has the explainable AI needed to certify autonomy. Oops. Watch the vendors back away from autonomy deadlines. I tell you, like the oops part of that. This
I just like your intonation.
Yeah, oops. Well, Apple did this yesterday. I think 2 days ago. After I wrote this, Apple announced they were backing away from their deadline. So get ready. And VWs, yeah, they're all doing it.
All right, let's go to number 11. I want to make sure we have time for people to
Let's do 11. Number 11 out of 10. Special bonus prediction. Universe 2.0 is not your mother's universe. The James Webb Space Telescope confirms that the universe is very, very different than we and astronomer Edwin Hubble had thought. Ideas about its history, its size and age, the Big Bang Theory, and every process that keys off these measurements will now need to be measured again. Perhaps resonance theory, which predicted all of this, can be of some assistance. So that's the bonus prediction. So with that, I think we should probably let our
open it up for questions.
Yeah.
So let's do this. If you have a question, please drop it into the chat so that we can call on you. And just to avoid total mayhem, there are a lot of people on this call.
And then Barry, you're going to moderate.
And then I will call on you as the questions come in. And I'll start with, let's see. No questions so far, only comments. Is there anyone who wants to raise their hand and ask an introductory question while everyone else is writing their questions down? I see Matt Griscom.
My question is this: will nuclear fission become popular again?
Yes, it will. But there are some problems, not the least of which have been brought out by the Ukraine war. And who wants to build one of those things in their country so that Russia can blow it up, with a normal bag of TNT or artillery shell? So I think that helped underline the one problem that is unavoidable, I think, in nuclear fission power, and that is the risk of contamination either by waste or by a terrorist attack, so or a war. So that's or I guess a tsunami if you ask the Japanese. So these issues have been addressed a little bit by the new makers of modular smaller plants, and where they self-shut down if things go wrong, and they've done a really great job trying to make them much safer than the plants of my youth. But there's one or two things like that it's really hard to guard against. So I do think they will be, but that's going to slow it down.
All right, next question is from Kevin Surace.
Okay, I'll stay alive. Yeah, the question is really, we're getting very close to a precipice where there's no stopping Iran. They are, nearing getting enough material to build nuclear bombs. And so Israel and the US have said they're not going to let that happen. I'm curious what your thoughts are, since you commented on oil, and that could possibly disrupt the world oil market if we or Israel take out their facilities.
By the way, hi, Kevin, and beautiful tree.
Oh, thank you. It's a real tree, by the way. I have to do this.
What's he doing?
He's proving that it's not a backdrop.
Oh, okay.
Not a backdrop.
Not a backdrop. All right.
It's a 15-foot tree. Okay.
Although we can't really be sure that it's really Kevin Surace there. So
that is true. It could be an AI, but not a neural net.
Be a deep fake.
Yeah.
Assuming you're really real, I hate to break your heart because you'll have a real heart, but I think Iran's had nuclear weapons for 5 years or more, maybe more. And what we're seeing with this CRINC alliance is we know that Russia has provided missile technology to the world, its world. We know that Pakistan provided nuclear weapons technology throughout the Islamic world. We know that Iran was illegally shipping missiles to North Korea under cargo shipments of flour and wheat and stuff. So we found that, so all these missile tests and weapons tests in North Korea, they're not North Korean. This is Iran's way of using North Korea as a testing ground, playing footsie with the West, which is really stupid. We're really stupid, while they negotiate some kind of stupid deal that they're violating every morning in North Korea, in my opinion. So I think they've had nuclear weapons and missiles that can deliver for a long time. And what they didn't have is testing. If they started testing, we'd all know about it, right? So that little fat man's been testing for them, and suddenly he went from having no luck with missiles and no luck with weapons, and then every day gets better. He's lighting things off as fast as he can. Those aren't his things, I don't think.
So you think it's too late to take out their uranium facilities because they've had it?
Yeah, they're already doing it. I think it's a charade, a complete charade.
Interesting.
I'm more cynical than BB is, because he's hoping that we get it done, as you're saying, before they can. I think they've had it for 5 or 10 years.
And we probably know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Mark Pransky is next, and then we'll go to Greg Ellis. So Greg, prepare yourself.
Hi, everybody. So given the prediction about betting, where do we get to bet on the predictions?
Oh, that's a good one. How much do you want to put down?
Hey, you got a good record, but there's two sides to every bet.
Your money, buddy. Yeah, we haven't actually done that. And Why do we take that under advisement? That's a very nice question, Mark.
Thank you. I have a second question.
All right, what is it?
Somebody I saw online, somebody kind of facetiously said, what if we built a wall at the southern border out of shipping containers?
They already did.
And I said, that's a great idea, especially if they make the interiors habitable, so that the people who are there in such quantities could actually live in them.
Arizona already did it.
Right. And that led me to the thought of, well, what if we have these container ships that are very good at taking these containers around the world? If containers were habitable, then if people needed to mass migrate, say off an island, they could do it. So the question
now
is,
you're
will
getting
we get
confused.
technology that is like a shell that you carry on your back?
You're a very smart guy, but you're getting confused. You're mixing metaphors here. So the problem isn't the islands that are sinking. The problem is what I mentioned earlier. And so, if you get all of Central America deciding they'd rather live in New York or Miami, and they come up, I think they do actually, they come up as fast as they can, they're not going to want to live in your shipping containers at the Arizona border. They're going to want to live in New York. And there won't be enough room in all those shipping containers to give them a home. They have no interest in living in those shipping containers. They'd rather live at home, but so it's not going to work.
Okay.
All right.
All right, Greg.
Hey, Mark, excuse my voice.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, last year at the prediction, you really nailed it. We said this year was 1939, especially you were ahead of the curve by 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
With that perspective, what year is it coming up in that metaphor?
Well, I watched there's a very good, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a guy named Rick Steves who's a travel videographer, and he in public television he has a lot of stuff that he shows every year during fundraising. And I just watched the only serious piece, really historically serious piece I've seen him do, and it's on fascism and its evolution historically in Europe. And I recommend it to anybody who's interested in history. And he was in Germany and in Italy, and he kind of walks you through the places where in Nuremberg, where Hitler talked to 250,000 people, and they're all going to see Heil and so forth. He took the whole thing that, that Crystal knocked, everything. And I'll tell you, at the end, they had a guy who was an historian in Germany, and they said, could this happen again? And he said, look, Germany was a very cultured place. This is a place of Beethoven and Bach and Nietzsche and all these different writers, Goethe, and it happened here. Of course it could happen again. And as you know, Greg, I've been saying that everyone's missing the whole point of this war. It's not military, it's economic. And that's hard for people to swallow. They don't like that idea. They think, oh, it's a trade fight from Trump. Got nothing to do with a trade fight. It's an economic war. Even in our own staff, I've had situations, Greg, where I've had to get a little upset and say, listen, damn it, it's a war. This isn't a conversation, it's a war. And it's hard for people to believe that in America, that we're in the middle of a war. So I'm answering your question. It's not 1939. It's 1941.
That's actually how Mark begins every SNS and fire meeting.
Yeah. Damn it.
Damn it, we're at war.
We're at war.
All right, the next question is from Alan Ray, and then we'll go to Steve Stroh.
Yeah, so great meeting today. So the issue I'm concerned about is we're so dependent on Taiwan and TSMC. If I was President Xi and I'd had to back down on COVID and my economy is collapsing, I'd look to invent an external diversion to unify the country.
Yep.
How long do you think we've got before Taiwan comes in under the crosshairs?
That's an interesting question. Timing is always the hardest part. If your question had been, will China eventually take over Taiwan? I would have to say, I think so. Under what terms is a different question, but I think so. So when will that happen? How will it happen? I think that the probable mechanism will not be directly military. It'll be economic. China is the top trading partner of Taiwan. So how hard would it be to put a blockade up and sanction Taiwan so they couldn't eat? And now we're back to, we're back into the 40s in Berlin where we're flying in food to Berlin, right?
Mhm.
So, you can picture a naval blockade all around Taiwan with missiles flying and all this crap. And we're trying to fly bombers in to drop candy bars into, in water.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the story. And that could happen sooner rather than later, because whenever I hear the Pentagon guys talk, it's like, oh, they're not going to attack yet because they don't have enough, whatever, ships. Yes, they do. They don't have enough troops. Yes, they do. They don't have enough. Well, they don't want to do it yet. Okay. But they don't have to. That's the point. They don't have to. I think they're just going to do a blockade. And they can do that tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
There's no way we're sending carriers in there with make up a number, 1,000 ICBMs pointing sideways at the carriers. Not going to happen. It's already too late to think in those terms. And I think everybody knows it. So I don't really understand what keeps them from doing that right now. I think you're right. If you were saying you believed in a landing D-Day, that's going to be 4 years from now. But if you said they will just use the same economic weapons they're already honing on the world, all right, starve them out.
They don't like conflict. They like to be sneaky.
Well, look at Hong Kong.
If and when they can be sneaky, they will be.
Yeah, they'll do the friendly thing.
Mm-hmm.
They'll fly in their own candy bars while they have a blockade on. Next question.
All right. Next question is from Steve Stroh.
I've just been observing for the year how quickly Starlink is taking over anything broadband that isn't fiber. It's now on cruise ships, it's now on planes, it's now on private planes, it's on private yachts, it's in rural areas. It's just amazing how fast it's evolved and is evolving, including the recent announcement about their defense business. Just curious your thoughts, Mark.
Well, Steve, last year I predicted that, and I called it Emperor Elon. Elon's not very popular this week, but I said SpaceX and Starlink would lead to. We probably read it, but anyway, if you go back and look at the predictions from last year, you'll see what you're talking about, and now it's done. So I agree with everything you're saying, and I don't know why he won't have complete control of communications worldwide. Why would you use Verizon if Starlink comes out with this next set of things, which will include phone deals with Verizon and with T-Mobile, right? That's already done. And so all the phone hardware makers, okay, that's probably underway right now. And then you're already seeing iPhone 15 automatically talks to satellites by text if you get lost in the mountains. That's cool. All right. Ukraine wages war with it, and on and on. So I think he's pretty much finished with the project. He just needs to get the next set of satellites up, and he'll keep adding more. I don't see what will get in his way.
Sierra said that Starlink was recently mostly denied by the FCC.
Was what?
She said Starlink was recently mostly denied by the FCC thanks to scientists telling the FCC that our ozone is at risk.
I don't believe that's true. Okay. Next question.
Next question is from Rennie Gleason.
Hey there, Synbio. It's going to change everything. But this year, next year, 100 years, you seeing anything interesting popping in that space this coming year?
In bio?
Synbio, yeah.
Synbio.
Ginkgo rolled out. They merged with, blah.
Yeah, Synbio is hard. Synbio is hard for a lot of reasons. From a compute side, what you're seeing still in biotech, synthetic or otherwise, is hypothesis-driven work. One leading indicator that someone's looking for, two leading indicators someone's looking for, maybe three. in a system which is made of 10,000 things. So there's no question that biology is much more complicated than the tools are that are looking at it. And that makes for a very limited universe of solutions, synthetic or otherwise. Another way to say it would be like take Craig Venter, the first inventor of the synthetic cell. He first got to boot up a cell and so on. But you've got to know, it's one thing just to reproduce the DNA, fine. It's a little more complex when you work on the cytoplasm, but there's a lot going on there. I'll give you a fun example. There is a pretty strong indication right now that in the early divisions of a cell, where the geography is just being formed, north, south, however you want to say it, split in half again, that the electric fields are driving it. So given that all proteins have electric fields, it's not surprising that there would be electric fields at a meta level in the cell. They've been measured, I guess. You can see them online. And the question would be, well, there's one guy, I won't name him, but he's in YouTube country, who's a biologist, and he was showing that as an example with the planaria worm or with certain lizards, you cut their tail off and then it regrows again. And so regeneration of tissue did not require, this is pretty interesting, DNA participation. It was dependent upon the electrical fields at the cut that had been made in the tissue. So if true, that's a really interesting discovery.
Huh.
So, when you lose a finger and it grows back or whatever, it's not because your DNA is saying grow back necessarily. The DNA is more like the backbone of the operation. It's the infrastructure, the superhighway, but the actual instructions of what should each next cell do may be mediated by something more than just DNA. So there's a lot there, right? There's a lot going on. And to make something synthetic, which is not just very, very basic, eat oil, I guess, that'd be good. We can do that already. But things that are more complicated will require a deeper understanding of life first.
So, Mark, I want to ask you a question, which is, we have a lot more questions and only 3 minutes left in our scheduled time. Would you be willing to go until 5:30 so we can get to a few more questions?
I can't, I'll go to 5:15, only because I've got another heavy date after this. So a very important meeting after this.
All right. So the next question is from John Delaney. And then we'll go from there to Mike Riddle.
Very succinctly, Mark. What's the long-term future of digital twin development applied to very complex systems and learning to manage or create them or alleviate problems?
So first of all, for the crowd, John, I have to get on my knees here and offer you an apology, because you were right and I was wrong. And I love to say that when it's true. And John had been referring to creating a digital, he's an expert in ocean work, and creating a digital twin of the Salish Sea, I believe, or something like that. And I was saying, well, that's, digital twins are things like jet engines. This is a pretty complicated situation over here in the ocean.
Mark, let me just say I was raised Catholic, and all I can say to you is absolvo te.
Thank you. I feel better already. So is your question, will it happen, or how long will it take, or?
Is it worth putting all the energy into it that it's going to take to look at entire systems like an urban sea that is surrounded by a drainage system?
Yeah.
And the whole thing, it's unbelievably complicated.
Yeah, let me put it the way I just put it with synthetic biology. I'm sure you can make twins of like the ocean flow. Fine.
No problem.
Not a problem. But if you're requiring, reproduction in a twin of the true complexity of the biological systems in the ocean, there's no way in H that's going to happen in our lifetime. So
okay, you're younger than I by quite a bit. So what do you predict for Roger Payne and me? I see him taking a nap over there.
Yeah, Roger. You mean in your lifetime, what can we do with a twin? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, the question is whether it's worth advocating that we begin, because if we ever get there for many different kinds of systems,
The answer is yes.
then it's worth
The answer
trying.
is yes.
Okay,
You know,
thanks. That's all.
whether or not whoever lives longest and all that stuff, but the answer is it's worth starting. Absolutely.
Yeah. Barrett, that's all I have to ask of your brother.
All right.
Or-
He's
or
not my
is he
brother,
your-
he's my
or is
father.
he- Or is he your
But I
father?
can understand the confusion because there are a lot
He
of
looks-
Andersons that work
He
together.
looks so young these days.
Yeah, thank you. You
Or
do.
maybe that's Evan. I'm getting confused.
All right,
Yeah.
Mike Riddle.
Thank you.
Okay. Thinking back to what you said about the likelihood of China taking a form of effective control of Taiwan, my question is, what sort of things can we be doing to mitigate the harm that they might do us through that control?
Right. I was thinking about this yesterday, Mike, and this will sound bad, I guess, but I have to think that the Pentagon, US Pentagon, has a secret plan, and I'm not saying this because I've heard this anywhere. I'm just saying it because I think it has to be true, that there would be a moment where if there isn't C4 already planted in rose boxes all the way around TSMC and UMC, somebody's gonna come in with a fancy missile and take out the entire operation. There's no way we're gonna let China have that. And Taiwan would not want that to happen, but I don't think we're gonna ask. So my feeling would be at that moment when China takes possession of Taiwan, there will no longer be a TSMC or a UMC.
Are there other real risks besides the risk to TSMC of that scenario?
Sure, because as I mentioned earlier, I think it's 90% of the high-end chips are made at TSMC. So how does the world going to be if you bomb it? What's the global economic effect of that? It's not zero. I mean, you and I know, both of us know that chips drive everything. So you take out, and I guess the best way to do what we're doing is what we're doing now, which is the free world. Sounds old-fashioned, but the free world, the inventing world, needs to be doing exactly what we're doing. Europe doesn't understand yet what's happening here. They're living in 10 years ago. They're in make-a-wish world still. They don't get China. They still want to pretend that China's okay somehow. Germany, worst of all, I would say. But the smart players understand what America, both Trump and Biden, what America is doing to become more disengaged from China, particularly with regard to chips, chip technology, the things that make chips, all that stuff, as fast as we possibly can, which is why we have the CHIP Act and the Infrastructure Act. Onshore that, get that stuff, get TSMC making that Phoenix plant, on and on and on and on, so that we are ready as fast as how much time? Someone asked how much time we got here. I don't think we have very much time. It takes 2 years minimum to put up a fab, and probably a little more, 10 billion or more to do it. And so, get on it, right? Get on it, because replacing the production capacity of TSMC is no small thing. Big deal. It's a big darn deal. And in the economic effects of losing TSMC, whether we destroy it or whether the Chinese take it over, are impossible to overstate.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Next question. So I had another question from someone about they had trouble getting into the first part of the conversation, but if that is the case, if you missed any part of this conversation, we'll be sending the full video around to all members. So you'll be able to rewatch any of the original part at the beginning that you missed, or if you had to hop off and miss any of the end. So we have a couple, I think we just have a couple more questions. So the next one is from Glenn Heemstra.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Glenn. How are you?
So the question I really want to ask you, but I'm not going to ask you, is when do you think Elon wanders back over to Tesla and SpaceX? But I want to ask an immigration question. New Congress calls, says, Mark, write us an immigration policy that actually works. What are 3 or 4 features that U.S. immigration policy should put in place that are not in place? Or that would actually work in this billions of people sloshing around the world
Yeah.
looking for economic opportunity.
Well, you know who's done it really well is Canada.
Yeah.
If you want to look for a place, you know, a little object lesson, it's hard for Americans to move to Canada, and we all want to, you know, but you've got to have a skill set, or you got to buy land. There's a whole long list. I remember because I tried it a couple of times, and it's not easy, you know, and it takes 6 months of this and 6 years of that. 10 years later, maybe you're Canadian. So, except if you were in Hong Kong, of course, if you had $1 million, you're in. So they had a very interesting list of ways to become Canadian, or at least to get into the country, and it worked. They do have borders, and we don't. So I'm not a lefty or a righty or whatever, but I've said to my whole family since this whole thing began, what is a country without borders? It's not a country. I mean, how do you even call it a country? How would taxpayers afford the country? You know, there's just no math you can do to say, oh, what the heck with borders? Don't need that. So it's the first definition of a sovereign nation, in my humble opinion, that any country has defensible borders. If it doesn't, it's not a country. And everyone knows this. Why are Americans confused? Why is this a political issue? Why is it bad to defend your border? Why, in what world is that true? I think it's nuts. So I would say, and forget all the parties, everyone go home, stop shouting at each other, seal the borders tight. Now, what do you want to do? But if you don't do that, you don't get to have the conversation, right? Then your question makes sense. Until we do that, there's no point in having the conversation. Once you've done that, then I think I would look at Canada and go, well, what do you want? You know, well, we want to have this and that, and that. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Let's do that. But we don't have a chance to even start that, right? As I just mentioned, 250,000 people came in from Cuba, unknown, just floated in. Wow, that's more than all the Mariellas and all the second rafters that came in together in 2 different waves. It's more than that all in 1 year. Who knew? So I think that we're idiots, and until we're serious about being a sovereign nation with real borders, we don't get that choice of doing the smart thing, which might be, well, we want to have people who are skilled in engineering. We want to have people who are hard workers. We want to have entrepreneurs come on from all around the world. We want to have people who want to work in farms because we need that, and whatever, you know. We could do all that. It'd be very easy, and we can be very generous about it too. You know, you can't be generous when people are busy with their hands in your pockets. But if you have a choice, and you actually can maintain some stability, you can be very generous. And I think we would be, you know. So I just think we just got to do it right.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Last question is from your sister, Sharon Anderson Morris,
Uh-oh.
I believe.
Sharon?
Yeah, my question is, excuse me.
Yeah.
What do you think about the past year of Bitcoin and the future year of Bitcoin? I have a very dear friend of mine who is intentionally living in El Salvador after doing a $41 million Bitcoin deal that just didn't work out. And I see these coming up all over the place. So I think what the question is how do you feel Bitcoin will go from last year to next year? And do you consider it still a wise investment?
Well, here's my answer for, I am a proud Bitcoin owner, by the way.
Sorry.
You shouldn't, you shouldn't buy anything you can't afford to have go to zero. And you should, whatever you buy, just ignore it. Put it in a shoebox and pretend it's not there. Come back 10 years from now. So, you know, it's so volatile because there's no army behind it that people are gonna be playing with this for a long time, I think. And it'll go to, you know, it'll go to $5 and it'll go back to 50,000 and it'll drive you crazy. I think you just have to put it aside, whatever you can afford to ignore, to lose completely, do that and no more than that, because chances are quite high it might actually just go to zero. It is actually, you know, a piece of code and anyone can hack a piece of code.
Right.
So they will, maybe they already have. So meanwhile, I would just say, you know, it's an interesting thing. It's not currency. It's really it's more like a stock, which is what the SEC is trying to get figured out.
Right.
And so, if you want to own that stock, go ahead and just assume that it's a high risk, high reward and ignore it.
Don't look at it every day.
Don't ever look at it again.
Right.
All right, so that is all the questions that we have. I want to, but there is one. So Sierra has been making lots of interesting comments, and I want to close with her second most recent comment. So Sierra, would you share the news that you just shared in the chat with the whole group of a video?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so we are entering solar maximum. I'm a plasma physicist, and this is one of my primary interests. And, our grid and our technological systems are not prepared for that at all. And it's one of the things that I have a lot of conversations with experts on, and it's really concerning. So I encourage everyone to go to ready.gov and look at their space weather page. And it basically says, the government has no plan and that we're on our own to do something about it. It's really disturbing, but yeah, hopefully nothing happens, but we are entering solar maximum, just something to keep in mind.
How long will that last, Sierra?
So we're going to enter a peak around, it could be next year. They don't know exactly when it is actually, but it could be about some period, about a year, where we have very strong space weather, and we've had multiple solar flares today actually, so it's ramping up. So we're way overdue for another extreme event, like a Carrington event that happened in the 1800s, and there's a 12% chance that we have another very large storm in the 2020s. So
right.
Yeah.
So
I say be glad you don't own Starlink.
Yeah. You heard it here first. Get your microgrids set up. Go out and buy your
Starlink's already
portable
lost.
generators.
Starlink has already lost a number of satellites through problems like that.
Yeah, SpaceX lost $100 million worth of satellites.
There you go.
From the lowest geomagnetic storm level. Yep.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you, Barrett.
Thanks you,
everybody. Been a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yep. And you'll get a copy of this as a member, as a global report starting right now. And then we will see you. Boy, can we make a half announcement?
Oh, we can make a half announcement. I think we can. I think we're close enough to make a half announcement.
So we're going to announce, drum roll, that thanks to Barrett and the team, we are going to have, drum roll, a face-to-face fire a year from now, roughly, and a little earlier. And it's going to be in a beautiful place, in a beautiful hotel in California on the beach. And it'll be more fun than anything.
Yeah.
We'll be back to having our usual Fire 23 experience, Fire 23. And we're all pretty excited. So you'll be hearing about this about a week from now. All right.
All right. Thank you,
On that
everyone.
note, thanks, everybody. And we'll see you soon.
Have a wonderful 2022 end, and take these predictions with you into the new year.
There you
We
go.
hope they prepare you for the year to come.
Yes, we do. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.